So today we're going to be going over how to build a scraper. I'm going to start sharing with the presentation. Let's say share screen. How do I do that? I'm trying to remember how I did this the last time. Share screen. Okay, here we go. And all right, so today we're going to be talking about how to build a scraper. This should be a relatively quicker seminar than the last one. The last one was pretty long, but this one should be a little bit shorter. For those who don't, I want to provide a disclaimer at first. Actually, the first thing is that building this webinar is generally going to be for informational purposes. Building a scraper can get you in trouble depending on if you're not reading the terms of services and privacy policies on different websites. So don't just go and scrape any old website without understanding the website's terms of services and privacy policies, because there might be some reasons why you can't scrape on a particular website, not because of its technical difficulties, but because certain companies wouldn't allow for you to scrape that information. So in general, a scraper is very simply any computer program that searches a website for specific information and then saves that information. This might sound like a very general definition, but it's generally because any type of website that you access online is going to have some sort of text or some sort of HTML or some sort of JSON or whatever, and you want to get that information. And some websites are generally more easier to scrape, some are more difficult to scrape, but the end goal is so that you can collect the information that's important. You'll see websites like, I'm trying to think of a good website example that might do scraping. You might have like ESPN, for example. They might scrape game scores from a particular website and then store it on their database or something like that. Or other organizations might scrape data. The biggest company that scrapes data is Google. Google scrapes information all the time. They have different bots that go in to different websites and crawls each web page and then saves important information about that web page to help inform their search engine. That's like one of the biggest companies that use scrapers, but a lot of companies use scrapers in order to get information or even in order to get information and have real-time information in the sense. Now, the interesting thing, the thing about scrapers is that there's not a one-size-fits-all kind of scraper. There isn't like a scraper that you can build that just kind of is like a Swiss Army knife that does everything. In general, every scraper that you build for a particular website is going to be very specific to the website that you're building it for. The only reason why Google is able to even have scrapers that are very general is because they're not actually looking for very specific information. They're just looking for information about the website. And you can easily scrape that by having an understanding of the website, like having HTML, for example. But even then, it becomes difficult for Google to scrape every single type of website for a couple of reasons. But mainly is because every website's different. Every website is built differently. Every website is coded differently. Every website has different purposes. And because all websites are different, you're not going to be able to just build a scraper that kind of addresses or allows for you to just scrape anything from everywhere. You're going to have to look at a website that you want to scrape and then pull the specific information you want to grab from it. And that's how you build your scraper. So by understanding that, you're gonna have to, the way that you would build a scraper is going to be a different approach than how you would necessarily build, say build an app or a chat bot. Like you're going to have the same, it's going to be similar in like the frame of mind, but the purpose of this webinar is kind of to like teach you the general practice of how you would approach scraping a website, and then kind of provide you with some of the libraries that one would use when going to scrape a website. At the end, I'm going to demonstrate 2 scrapers that I built that have 2 different approaches in how they address scraping the information. So in general, you're going to need like 5 different things in order to scrape any website. The first thing is, the most important thing really, is you're going to need to have a knowledge of HTML. Every website is generally built with HTML, even if it's not HTML, might be XML, for example. So they all are going to be node-based documentations, node-based being that each HTML tag is a node in like a node tree, and parsing it. You have to have general knowledge of what HTML is in order to scrape a website. If there is a specific information in a particular tag, for example, if you want to scrape all of the text in the P tags, you're going to need to know what a P tag is in order for you to even grab the information from that P tag. You have to know what IDs are and classes are in order to understand how you can navigate a web page and then get the information that's most important to you. So that's the most important thing. I build most of my scrapers in Python, so I'm going to be talking about different libraries that one would use if they were to build a scraper in Python. However, some of the things that if you do use different languages, just know that replace the names with the language or with the appropriate libraries of importance in your particular language of choice. The second thing you're going to need is a library that allows for you to access websites. Libraries that allow you to access websites are like requests, urllib.requests. They send get requests or post requests to a particular website and grab the HTML. That's one thing that you're going to need to do, is grab HTML from a particular web page. You can also do this with Selenium. Selenium is a web browser automating process. That is another way that you can get HTML, and it's going to be very important depending on what type of web page you're navigating, whether you would use requests, for example, or you would use Selenium. Mainly the difference would be if you know that the web page is pretty static in its information, you're going to use, it would be best to use requests, but if it's not necessarily a static web page, you might want to use Selenium. We're going to get to more of that in detail later. The third thing that you're going to need is a library that allows for you to actually parse the HTML. One, you got to get the information, but it's going to be in its HTML form. Then you're going to need a library that's going to help you actually parse and navigate the HTML so that you can read it and get the information that's more important to you. In this particular case, Python, I use Beautiful Soup. Beautiful Soup is a very easy library that allows for you to actually navigate HTML documents and search for particular elements in an HTML document and get the information that you need. Number 4 is not necessarily important, but it's something that's very helpful. You need to have a list of user agents. User agents are very helpful when you're scraping different websites, because some websites might block you if you constantly use the same user agent. In order to make your website look, or your scraper look more human-like, you might switch the user agent. The user agent is essentially what is being sent to the web server from the web browser. So if you're using Google Chrome, for example, Google Chrome, when it sends a request to facebook.com, it's going to send a user agent that says, this is a Google Chrome browser. But if you're using Firefox, it's going to use a different user agent. And what ends up happening is, if you see some services try to block individuals with high amounts of traffic, and they might use the user agent as a means to determine if it's the same user constantly accessing the website. So switching the user agent actually makes it easier, or makes it more difficult relatively more difficult to get blocked when navigating a web. The last thing that you're going to need is any library that allows for you to actually store the information. It's one thing to actually collect or get the HTML and get the information from the HTML. You also are going to need a place to store that information, because that's why we're scraping it. Do you have a question, Madoa?
Yes, I have a question. So about user agents, specifically on Google, if Google does the same web scraping but doesn't want people to scrape their website, how do you get around that?
So this is where it gets interesting, because Google would be the way that if I were to scrape Google, the way that I would scrape it would be through browser automation. It is very difficult to scrape Google purely through just regular scraping. You would have to create essentially a browser experience where you're using Selenium, accessing Google, automating like this process where it pretends like a human's actually using Google, and then scrape the links. So that would be the way, if you're talking about scraping Google in particular, that's how you would like technically do it. The reason why Google is technically able to scrape all these different websites is because a lot of people give consent to that. People kind of want to be scraped because that allows for you to get indexed. So Google benefits from that, from the ability to, like, because they're such a big company, that being on their platform is lucrative for them, but it might not necessarily be lucrative for Google to give you their information because they want to be competitive. So in a sense, it's technically easy. It's not difficult to scrape Google from a technical standpoint, but the challenge becomes like, do you get blocked? Do they sue you? Things of that nature. So that would be what I would take into consideration. But yeah, so if you're going to scrape information, you got to want to store it somewhere. You're scraping all this important information. You got to save it, whether it be in a CSV file, whether it be in a JSON file. You might save it in a SQLite database or a Postgres database. Whichever database or file format you want to save it in, it doesn't matter. But as long as you find the file format or the storage format that's important, that's hopefully you. So. Now, in general, there are kind of like a couple of questions you have to ask yourself before you just start building a scraper. The first thing is there an API for this website? If there is an API for the website, use the API. Like, that is probably, like, don't build a scraper, like, use their API. They might have a curl API where you have to build a wrapper on top of it, and that's a different story. They might have their own third-party library that allows for you to access their data using that API. It's better to just use the API, mainly because it easily formats the information in a way that's helpful to you. And then two, you're not going to really get in trouble if you're using their API to access their information, because they're going to have general guidelines on how many times you can use it, or what information is accessible. So the easiest way to not get in trouble and the easiest way to get information that's important to you, if they have an API, is to just simply use the API. Now, if you want to go beyond the API, that's a different story, and that's totally fine. The second question you have to ask yourself is the content dynamically generated using JavaScript? If so, then you need to use some sort of web browser automation software that allows for you to actually, for the JavaScript to be generated. What ends up happening is,
right? You know what to do with it until it's at a point where you want to eat it. You're the one that, I'm more flexible than.
So if the thing that's important to know is that when you're accessing a website, some content is static. It might be generated on the server side, and when it's generated on the server side, you don't actually need to automate the browser experience because there's no JavaScript that's necessary that needs to be rendered in order for you to access the information. But we're getting into a phase now where a lot of websites essentially you might have single page applications or even multi-page applications, but that are built on a Jamstack, that JavaScript API markup, where they're basically building websites where the front end is accessing some API and then generating the front end. Because of that, you can't actually just simply use libraries like requests in order to get that information. You actually have to automate your browser experience using a library like Selenium. Selenium essentially is a software that if you want to test a website, it's usually used for web testing. So you might have a website that you want to test how it works. You want to see, oh, if this button works. One way that you would do it is like click the button and see it works, but quality assurance testers build tests in Selenium in order to automate that process, where instead of them actually manually testing the program, they would then automate that process and have it tested through this script. And this script and this program is usually use Selenium. Selenium's like the best one. It's free. So if it's dynamically generated using JavaScript, use Selenium. Now, I'm going to talk about some troubleshooting issues, and then I'm going to go in and show you two scrapers that I built, one that I'm finished with, and then one that I'm working on or am finishing. But there are generally like 4 troubleshooting issues that you would have when you're building a scraper. The first thing is, if you're not scraping the right data, generally speaking, you need to check the tags that you're scraping for. If you look at when you're scraping the data that on a website, you want to get tags that are as specific as possible that contain the information that you need. So it's easier if you want to. It's very easy to just simply say get all of the p tags on a website and then save that information, but that might not be the specific information that you're looking for. So you need to find out, if you want to be more specific, know what class you're trying to scrape for, know what IDs you're trying to scrape for, or know what names of the elements that you're trying to scrape for. Just simply scraping large swaths of information might not be as helpful. The second thing that ends up happening is you will build a scraper that works on, let's say you build a scraper that works on the first page of a website, but then it goes to the second page and then it breaks. Or one day it's totally working fine, and then the next day it's breaking because the specific thing that you were looking for isn't actually appearing. So one of the things I generally do is put things in try and accept blocks, so that if it were to crash, it will you could either have it throw an error, or it could like save the link that it couldn't scrape appropriately. Things like that can be helpful in order to continue with the scraping process without your entire program failing, but can let you know if something isn't necessarily working correctly. The third thing that I've noticed in particular when I scrape web pages that are that dynamically generate content is that there might be slow page loads. You might like fill in a particular form, and you click the search button, and then it takes a while for the content to generate. What you need to do on that is generally use a module or a library that allows for you to delay the process in which you go from filling out a form or doing one thing and then doing the next thing in the scraping process. So if it takes 10 seconds for the information to load up, let the computer program sleep for 10 seconds before you proceed to the next one. Finally, there are going to be times where you might get blocked. You might get timed out. There might be some errors that are being thrown by the server because you're doing a lot of traffic on their website. One of the ways that you can get around that is by using different user agents again. So if you are basically, if you can have a list of user agents, and upon each request, use a different user agent in order to access the information, that might be a way to get around it. Another way is to use different IP addresses using a VPN that constantly changes the IP that it's searching with could also help you get around from being blocked. All right, so now I'm going to share two scrapers that I've been working on. So now I'm going to share two scrapers that I've been working on. The first scraper that I've been working on is the first scraper that I'm going to share is a scraper that basically is scraping information, scraping the City of Houston agenda items. And then the second scraper that I'm working on that's not finished is one that scrapes the City of Houston food inspection data. And there are two reasons why I'm showing those two different ones. To address a question that I saw in the comments, can Selenium get past the I am not a robot check? To answer that question, it's no. Selenium cannot, to my understanding, to my knowledge, it is very difficult to get around the I am not a robot check. And mainly because the way that those buttons are created, they're essentially created in a way so that a scraper can't get around it. If you're doing an automated process like using like Selenium or something like that, it's not going to be able to access that and click it. The way that they've coded it essentially is so that you can't really get around it with Selenium. Now, there are some ways. There have been some experimentations on how to get around it. Those ways have not come to light, and once someone finds a way to get around it, then Google's going to create an even better I am not a robot check mark that makes it more difficult to get around it. So it's basically a game of cat and mouse when it comes to that particular button. One way that some people might try to experiment with it is if you're using there's like screen readers that treat the button differently, and that screen reader might actually allow for you to click the button in a way that you wouldn't be able to when you're just visually looking at it on the screen. So that might be one way, but generally it's very difficult to get around the I am not a robot check mark. So with that in mind, I have two scrapers. One is a scraper that does not use Selenium, and one is a scraper that does use Selenium. And the main reason is because one has very static content generally, and then one has dynamic content that doesn't just naturally appear on the page, and it makes more sense to build it in Selenium. Now, to note, you can build every scraper in Selenium if you want to. You can do that if you want to. There's nothing that stops you from doing that, but it's kind of more tedious to set up a scraper with Selenium, more so than it is just simply accessing the HTML content. So if you just need that HTML content and it's not something that's dynamically generated, don't go through the trouble of using Selenium when you can just simply like access that HTML. So I'm going to show the website that I've scraped. So let's go back to sharing the screen. Just share your screen. All right. So first one, let's go. All right. So I'm going to go to this website right here. After this meeting is over, I'm going to post the links, or I'm going to post the code in GitHub and share the links with you guys so that you can see the code as well. So we have this link, and one of the things about this scraper is that goodness. All right. So now this scraper is essentially a scraper for the City of Houston agenda items. One of the things that you know is that when you access it, it's pretty static. The content, you don't see anything that's really dynamic about the content. There's no like forms that you need to fill out or anything like that. If you were to refresh the page, it's going to be the same thing every single time you refresh the page. So this would tell me that the content on here can be something that's scraped. It can be scraped just simply using like requests library in Beautiful Soup. So let's say I want to find, but I don't want all of this information. I want very specific information. I want these things in particular. I want the agenda items, not just everything on this page. Not everything is important to me. I want the specific agenda items. So with that in mind, I built this scraper that kind of does that. So I generally structure my stuff in classes. So what it does, we'll go to the scrape URL function where all of the meat of the program is taking place. Essentially, I import requests and I import Beautiful Soup as beautiful, or BS4 as Beautiful Soup. I then get the URL, the base URL, which is this link right here, and I pass in a meeting ID. Every agenda item, as you can see in this particular link, has an agenda item, a meeting ID, and that meeting ID for this one is 349, but it can be for something else if you want. The second thing that I then do is I get the text from that HTML, which is simply, in this particular case, is just simply the HTML text, not just the text, but it's all of the HTML that comes with it. So the third thing that I do is I check to see if the agenda doesn't have, there are times where if you're scraping an agenda item or an agenda where it says this agenda is not available. So if you can find that in the HTML, just simply break out of this loop. If not, we're going to do these two functions. We're going to get the agenda date, and then we're going to get the agenda item pages. These are two functions that I've created. First thing that I do is I have a list of months. I then use Beautiful Soup here. I say Beautiful Soup, get the HTML that we captured, pass it in this function. We're going to search for all of the spans in the HTML, and then we're going to find if the span has the month in particular, has one of these months in that text. We'll get that, save it, and if not, we'll just say that we couldn't find a date. Last thing that we're going to do in this particular case is we're going to get the agenda item. So what we do here is we simply, we're going to say soup equals Beautiful Soup. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to search for table rows. And that's because this is where you have to understand the actual web page that you're scraping. This entire thing, for some reason, is a table. Each thing is a table data. So if I want to get this particular content, I know I have to scrape things that have table data or in table data tags. So back to this code, I basically get all of the table data tags. I get all of the table rows, and then I get the table data in the table row. When I do that, I basically have a list of table rows and then a list of table datas in each table row. When I iterate through that, I find out if the length is 3. And I do that mainly because there are some table rows that don't have a length of 3, and then there's some that do. The ones that do have the bill text, so I want to get that, or the agenda item text. That's the rows that I want. I then search for ones that have the word video in it, get the agenda text item, and then add it to this array. So I'm going to add 2 more lines of code here. So I'm going to say, I'm going to print agenda date, and then I'm going to print a string version of self.agenda items. All right, so now I'm going to run this. So I'm going to say Python Houston agenda. And what you'll see is it'll, at some point, it'll print, there we go. So it'll print it'll print the date. In this particular case, it's printing the span that has the date in it. And then it has this long list of all of the agenda items, right? Now, I didn't build it where it'll save that information, but you could basically just save that information. You could say, like, import JSON, say import JSON, and then say like with JSON dot dump agenda items dot JSON W as file to JSON. Oh no, this will be with file dot file. What is this? Yeah, with file, so JSON dot dump, and then you would say the file, and then self dot agenda items. That would essentially save the information that we've collected. All right, so we'll do that. Now I'm going to show you the next scraper that I built. The second scraper that I built is a little bit different, and it's different because this is where I would use Selenium. This website that I accessed is essentially much more complicated than simply this one. Now, this is a website where the city of Houston, if you want to look at the different violations that a particular restaurant does, you can access that here. So you could like put in a particular day, say February the 8th, and then let's say February the 8th as well. So you can put the information that you want, and then you click that button, and then it refreshes the page. You get all of this information, and you have all of these different links that you have to click. It's like you can't even really just like, I mean, you could try to parse this URL out and try to get for information that's necessary, but it just seems so much easier to just simply automate this entire process of getting each of those links. So granted, this scraper isn't completely finished, but I'm going to kind of show you how Selenium works a little bit when building this scraper, the second scraper. So this scraper right here, I'm importing requests. I actually don't need this requests, so I'm going to take that line out. But what you do need is essentially to scrape this information, Selenium and Beautiful Soup. Beautiful Soup to actually parse the HTML, and Selenium to access the web browser or create a web browser and scrape the information. So what I did was essentially provide a link to one of the drivers that you need in order to automate the browser experience. Have a base URL, have some inspection data. This isn't all finished, but essentially this function kind of shows you how you would navigate a particular website with Selenium. You would say you use this function called find element by name or find element by tag name. So that allows you to search through a website and find particular tags, find particular elements with a particular name. So in this particular case, if we were to go back to this website, I am searching for these tags right here. Excuse me. I am searching for these 6 tags right here, and mainly because what I wanted to do when building this scraper was I wanted to go each day by day to get these particular links. And the way that I would do that is by simply filtering by a particular day, like February the 8th, refresh the page, and then download each of these or get each of those particular links. while navigating through these result pages right here. I didn't get to that part yet, but you need to know what these elements are and what they mean. So in this particular case, I said I need to get, excuse me, wrong scraper. I need to get 6 tags, or I need to get 6 elements in the web page. There's a SD month, SD day, SD year, which I'm assuming means start date month, start date day, and start date year. And then end day or ED day, ED year, and then ED month being, I'm assuming ED month, ED day, and then ED year. I then get each of those elements and I say, I want to get the options in each of those elements because this is a select, and in the select is essentially options. So I want to iterate through each of the options by the tag name option. And then get the text and see if it equals a particular thing that I'm searching for. In this particular case, year, month, or day. I'll grab that and then click the actual thing. So it'll actually click the particular thing that you're looking for. And finally, I'm gonna click the submit button to make the search, and you'll see this process in a little bit. I'm gonna import time, and I'm going to do some like time.sleep of a couple of seconds, just so that you can see what's actually taking place upon each iteration. All right, let's see. I'm gonna put another one that's like 5 seconds at the first. All right, so now this one is using, this is gonna use a Firefox browser, so that's why it might look a little bit differently. So Houston, right. So, all right, so the first thing you'll see is it should load up. All right, so it's loading up right now. And as you see, it says 8 to 23. And we're going to start seeing some things change. First thing you saw, it says is now changed to January, now changed to the 3rd in 2019. And then you'll see end date change to January, and it'll also change to the 3rd, and also change to 2019. And then it's going to click the search button. So this is a different way of scraping because it's not like the first one where you didn't see a browser. This is actually pretending to be a human and scraping or at least automating the browser process. So then now that I got to this point, I can say, okay, I need to know what these links are and just grab those links and then click the next one. So that's how you would scrape this type of page if you would use Selenium. Now it's not completely finished, and I'll definitely have a finished version of this particular scraper when I'm done. But essentially, that's kind of all I have right now. So let me stop sharing my screen. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask me at this particular point. What is the average click? So one question is, what is the average click rate that websites use to detect robot versus humans? So it's not necessarily about the click rate as much as it is the requests that are being sent, because there might be a time where you don't have a lot of, you might not click a bunch of links, but you might access the same website over and over and over and over again. Generally, the way that I've seen some companies do it is by having a baseline understanding of how much traffic they receive. And then if they have more traffic or less traffic, then you might, if you have more traffic than normal, then they would assume that it's because of scraping. Could you quickly go back through how you got it to use Firefox and load the actual browser on the second screen? Yeah, sure. So let me exit out of this. So the first thing that I did, let me now, in here is essentially, I have a folder that's code for the Hue. And in this folder, you have one thing called a Gecko driver, and the Gecko driver is essentially it's the driver that allows for you to connect your Python code to a particular browser. If you use Selenium, you're going to need this particular driver in order to do these particular processes. You have different drivers for different browsers. So if you're trying to emulate Chrome, you would use the Chrome driver, as you can see in this particular folder. If you want to use Internet Explorer or Microsoft Edge, you would use those particular drivers for, oh, sorry, I'm sorry, I did not realize I wasn't sharing my screen. So right here is my folder for Code for the Hue. You're going to have a file called Gecko driver, or in this particular, you might name it whatever. But as long as it is the Gecko driver file that allows for you to actually connect your Python code to the browser. If I'm going to go back to that particular website, when I initialize the class, essentially we're doing a couple of things. The first thing that we're doing is we're creating an object called self.driver, and then we're attaching the driver, the web driver, Firefox, to this particular object with the path name being this particular path name, which directs to this file right here. We also have a base URL. This base URL just simply allows for you to get to this particular link and some other information I was going to use later. Now, when we go to the run function, what we see is self.driver.get. Now, if you're using a browser, if you're using Selenium, driver.get, the get function basically makes a request to a particular website. In this particular case, I'm just passing in this URL into the get function in order to access the HTML on that page. So now I'm going to run it again, and you'll see it'll boot up, and you'll see it instantly kind of go to that particular link. And as you'll see on the left-hand side, or my left, I think on the left-hand side, you'll start seeing it change some of the elements. It's delayed because I put those sleeps in. However, if you could remove those, and it would move a lot quicker for sure. And that's kind of how it works. Selenium is in and of itself something that you could spend like an entire seminar just learning how to do. So that would be in and of itself a different issue, or a different beast to challenge. But when it comes to scraping information, you just kind of have to, if you have a general understanding of what Selenium does and how it works, you should be able to like scrape a web page with understanding the caveats that, knowing that if it's not dynamically generated, you might have to use it if the content's not static, essentially. So the robot icon actually means that it is an automated process, and not that it's just an actual human, right? Can you also go through how we import the libraries and how we? Okay, yeah, sure. So the robot icon actually does mean, when you're using that, it's using some sort of browser automation process. So if this was purely just you, it wouldn't have that icon there. But because it's automated, it's going to show that little icon there, at least on when you're using it on Firefox. I'm not entirely sure I think it pulls up a similar icon on Google Chrome, and I'm not sure for other browsers, but that's kind of what it means. Now, to get the libraries that you need, one of the libraries that I use, so you would say pip install Selenium. I already have it installed, but that would be one way that you would install the would be the way that you would install the library. You would also pip install requests. Again, I already have these installed, but another library that one person could use is Scrapey. Now, I don't have that one, but you could use Scrapey essentially. Scrapey is another Python library that allows for you to scrape things. Trying to think what other libraries. I should know. The next library that you would probably install if you need is it would be called BS4. That stands for Beautiful Soup 4, because there's different versions of Beautiful Soup, and the most recent one is the one that you would want to install. We'll do, so it'd be pip install BS4. Already have it in, I already have it in a different version, but yeah, so you would install BS4. So I see that you searched January 3rd. Is there a library, any library or way to show the current date? Yeah, so one of the ways that you could do, so the way that this was a scraper that I was mainly building to scrape prior information. So the way that I built it out is so that it would pass in this particular make search function, in reference to this particular function, it would pass like old dates that I'm looking for. But for example, you could import, so you could say from date time, import date time, and then you can use the date time library, and then say like today equals date time dot today, and then pass in the parameters for that particular day to get that information. And then in order to have it continuously search every 15 seconds, what you would have to do is, what I would do is, if I want to put it on like Heroku, for example, you could set a Heroku scheduler that schedules out how often you want that particular script to run, and then scrape it on a regular basis. So you would have to essentially have your computer on 24 hours and then have it running that particular script. If in this particular case, you would just like, if you were doing this on your actual own machine, you would say like if true, and then run if true, and then like have it reference the script, like check for conditional, and if it does, then it runs it. That's how you would probably do it if you were just doing it on your own computer, but I would not advise for you to just keep your computer on for 24 hours. I would use something like Heroku, put on a scheduler, and it'll like scrape it regularly for you, which is a good question, Kevin. Are there any other questions? Speak more to the schedule. Okay, yeah. So now I'm gonna go to Heroku. So if you have Heroku, if you have a Heroku account, there is a thing called scheduler, and let's say make a new project just for the heck of it. So I'm gonna make a new project. I'm gonna call it Nile Test App, and I'm gonna create that. And when you're on Heroku, you can essentially, you have Heroku, you can go to, what is it? You go to resources, excuse me. We're gonna add a dyno on here just because I need a dyno in order to attach resources. So let's say, add-ons. So we're gonna go to add-ons. And then we're gonna type in Heroku scheduler. You'll then, you'll do standard Heroku scheduler, let's say provision, and then we're gonna click Heroku schedule right here. it'll open up this thing, and you click create job. And what create job opens up on this right-hand side is essentially you can pick at some, in this case, only every 10 minutes is probably the most recent or the most frequent you could run something. But you can then like type in, if you uploaded a project or whatever, you can type in, let's say Python, let's say in this particular case, you'd be like python.houston restaurant inspector.py. You type in that command and you would click save job, and it will run that job every 10 minutes. And this is, and the reason why I would do it on Heroku is so that you don't have to have your computer on. Depending on how long the script runs, you're not going to spend more than like $9 a month, assuming that you're running one particular process. And if you have a data, you could like have a database on here. All in all, ended up being about $16 a month. That's a good question, Madoa. Yeah. Any other questions? How do we upload? Yes. Okay. So I don't think this particular code is ready to be uploaded or can be uploaded to Heroku, or it will work exactly on Heroku. But we would have to init a project. So you say git init. So we'll initialize a repo. If you've already logged into Heroku, then you're fine. But what you do is you can say Heroku git remote, and then you're going to say -A to indicate the app, and I did Nile test app. So then I would say git status. I would git add Houston agenda scraper, and then I would say git commit. We'll do initial commit, and then we'll say git push. We'll push it to Heroku. Now I think this, yeah, it's going to throw an error. It's going to throw an error just because I don't have some of the there's like other files that I need to add, like a runtime.txt and a requirements.txt file. But Heroku is not actually a repo, and it works like a repo in the sense that it stores your code, and you use Git to like save your code and update your code. But it's not necessarily, it's a cloud-based service that allows for you to like run web applications or run scrapers if you want to. So it's not just it stores your code, but it's definitely more than just a repo for your code. To answer your question. So yeah, that would be kind of the process that you would upload your code to Heroku. I mean, you can definitely use other cloud-based services, or you don't even have to necessarily use a cloud-based service, but like other platforms like AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Platform. Those are places where you can like store your scrapers in order to run the code. Can you manage Heroku commits using Git GUIs? I'm not entirely sure. I've never tried doing that, but I'm not entirely sure actually. I would assume so, but I've never done it. Any other questions that you have?
Any more questions? Let's see. Any more questions? Okay. Okay. In the absence of none, I would say thank you everyone for coming. Amid the COVID thing, you still find out time to attend our event. We're happy and grateful, and
Now I will be sharing the code. I'll be posting it on GitHub, and it'll be in the presentation at the end of the. It'll be in the slideshow. So.
Yeah, and I'm going to share the slide. You will see it on LinkedIn, and if you in the meetup as well, I could share it with you, or on IT Experiences website, or Code for You, I guess, too.
Yeah, that's also.
Yeah. So we're going to share it, just follow us on our pages, and you get the recordings and the GitHub information. Okay, let me see. So thank you all for joining us, and follow us on the next event, actually. Hold on now.
Wait, sorry.
I said you should hold on, don't. Yeah. Uh-oh, typing something on time. I was gonna give my, okay. So yeah, thank you all. Thank you for attending. Now, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Alrighty.